For 13 years, the Western Conservative Summit has brought the nation's top conservative leaders to Colorado. Presidential candidates, members of the president's cabinet, governors, senators, members of Congress, influencers, media personalities, celebrities, and local leaders. More importantly, because the summit is hosted by Colorado Christian University, it is committed to education. Our workshops have educated thousands of conservatives on America's founding principles and how to address the most pressing issues facing our nation. The Western Conservative Summit Youth Conference has introduced the next generation of conservatives to Christ and the philosophical foundations of conservatism. We are preparing young leaders to take on today's ideological battles. In 2020, we couldn't meet in person because of the COVID shutdowns. So we produced the film America, America, God Shed His Grace on Thee, reminding Americans of their Christian heritage. Last year, 6 documentaries showcased the beauty and majesty of the Western United States while covering issues like the Second Amendment, Western energy, federal lands, and the rodeo. Now back in person, the 2022 Western Conservative Summit welcomes you to the Gaylord Rockies. In 2015, then CCU President Bill Armstrong admonished conservatives to mount their horses and ride. It was a call to personal action for our communities in the midst of our challenges. John Wayne once said, "Courage is being scared to death, but saddling up anyway." Fellow patriots, welcome to the 2022 Western Conservative Summit. It's time to saddle up and ride.
Please welcome the chairman of the Western Conservative Summit, Jeff Hunt.
All right, we are ready for day 2 of the Western Conservative Summit. Thank you all so much for joining us. My name, hey Ted, good morning. My name is Jeff Hunt. I am the wagon boss of this operation here at the Western Conservative Summit. We are so glad to have so many of you with us. I got to tell you just a brief story. Yesterday evening, I was back with the commander of the Aurora Police Department yesterday. And he said back there that his police officers that have been providing security for us today and during the summit have been, yeah, let's give them a round of applause. He told me that their police officers have been thanked more in one day than they have in their entire careers just by being at the Western Conservative Summit. A few just brief announcements and then we're going to get started. If you have not gotten in touch with the text messaging, which has to do with our straw poll and all that stuff, you want to text WCS for Western Conservative Summit, WCS, to 77007. So I'll say that again, 77007, text WCS, and then you'll be able to access the microsite and the straw poll and the exhibit schedule and all that stuff. So just one brief announcement. Friends, I am very honored for what's about to happen, and I hope you will be too. I'm not going to be able to get through this, so bear with me. On May 7th, 2019, two men walked into a STEM school Highlands Ranch classroom, opened a guitar case and pulled out a gun, and yelled to a classroom full of students, "Nobody move." It's pure evil. A young man with courage so strong and so deep within him ran right up to the shooter, threw the gunman against the wall, and started to try to fight him off. Another student joined Kendrick Castillo and sought to stop the gunman. 2 shots rang out. And this world lost Kendrick Castillo. Us parents who have children could only dream to raise a son as brave and selfless and devoted to his peers as Kendrick Castillo was. Friends, it is with tremendous honor, the highest honor that I can imagine, that the Western Conservative Summit begins this morning by welcoming the parents of Kendrick Castillo, John and Maria Castillo, to open us up with prayer. Let's welcome John and Maria Castillo.
Good morning. Thank you. Thank you. Before I get to the prayer, I just want to reflect on our most recent act of domestic terror, as I call it, or also known as school shootings. I'd like to remember the 19 children and the 2 teachers that were killed in Uvalde, Texas. And I also want to reflect and remember our hero and our son, Kendrick Ray Castillo, who lost his life in 2019 on May 7th in the STEM school Highlands Ranch shooting. You know, evil is amongst us and it's out there, but it never counts on the faithful, it never counts on the good, the heroes, the devout, the believers who are going to face evil head on. That's what Kendrick did, and that's what all of you have the ability to do with your lives, to go out and make change. Being conservative, being devout to your faith, and knowing that we're never alone, that we just need to surrender, and we'll be led. You know, Joshua 1:5, God says to him, "Before I formed you in the womb, I knew you. I consecrated you. I appointed you a prophet to the nations." We also know that God heals the brokenhearted and binds up their wounds. In Revelations, we know God wipes away every tear from their eyes, and there shall be no more death or mourning, wailing or pain, and we hope for better days to come. And with that said, I'd like to go ahead and have you join me in the Lord's Prayer, or as Catholics refer to it as the Our Father. So if you would join me, please. Our Father, who art in heaven, hallowed be thy name. Thy kingdom come, thy will be done, on earth as it is in heaven. Give us this day our daily bread, and forgive us our trespasses, as we forgive those who trespass against us. And lead us not into temptation, but deliver us from evil. Amen. Thank you. Take what you've learned the last couple of days and walk your faith into change. Go to your school boards, go to your politicians, and ask the questions about school safety and what you can do. Nobody can do this for us. You know, Maria and I have found that, you know, if not us, then who? If not now, then when? We must be the change. God bless each and every one of you.
Friends, I got to tell you, that's some of the reasons why I love the Western Conservative Summit so much, is to be able to interact with real heroes and friends like the Castillos. If you can, please stay standing as we do the Pledge of Allegiance. Please welcome CCU student Bethany Johns.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
All right, friends, I may be the wagon boss, but I'm proud to introduce the captain of this ship. Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome the president of Colorado Christian University, Dr. Donald Sweeting.
Please welcome the president of Colorado Christian University. Here's Dr. Donald Sweeting.
Good morning, everybody. Great to see you. Hey, do you know that CCU is one of the few universities in the United States where students actually say the Pledge of Allegiance? It is. It's great. There's a strange silence in many other places. Well, this morning I want to speak with you for a few minutes about higher education in America. Our colleges and universities, you may know, are in trouble. You heard Betsy DeVos last night speak about the breakdown of education in the K through 12 level. And sadly, it's happening in higher education as well. There's what I call an insanity at work in the academy, where people on the outside are starting to see it as they vote with their dollars and their feet. Did you know there was a drop in undergraduate enrollment in the last 2 years of 9% in the United States? And of course, the pandemic had something to do with that, but there's other things going on where people are starting to question the value proposition of college and university for many different reasons. But why is there an insanity in the academy? In my opinion, part of it is that so many schools have a shrunken vision of higher education. I mean, they've tossed out so much of what was part of traditional education, the promotion of wisdom and character and faith, the teaching of history, passing on of our heritage. And along with that, so many schools are captivated by so-called progressive ideas that are ruining the academic quality of our universities. The way I put it is there's too much university education these days that's about deconstructing everything, including students, and that's stripping away our cultural heritage. And then along with that, they're demanding a Marxist transformation of American society. One of the articulate critics of higher education is former educator John Ellis. In his book, The Breakdown of Higher Education, he writes, "Decades of radicalization have turned America's once great universities into a monoculture of leftist orthodoxy." He says, "Our universities are no longer devoted to the free exchange of ideas in the pursuit of truth." And he talks about the corruption of higher education by radical politics. I don't know if you ever heard of the name of Richard Weaver. Anybody hear that name? Richard Weaver wrote a very influential book in the 1940s. He was an English prof at the University of Chicago. The book has been a conservative classic. It's called Ideas Have Consequences. It was an arresting title, but in that book, Richard Weaver wanted to make the point that what is taught in the classroom and promoted in our schools, especially the universities, will in only a matter of time filter down to our streets and in the general culture. Ideas have consequences. Do you believe me? Maybe you don't. Maybe you don't. But let me give you a couple examples. Moral relativism, the idea that there's no truth, no objective truth. Where did that come from? Well, it came from the universities. You might remember, some of you who are older, the name Alan Bloom, another University of Chicago professor. In 1987, he wrote a very provocative book called The Closing of the American Mind, How Higher Education Has Failed Democracy and Impoverished the Souls of Today's Students. And he made the point that moral relativism being taught not only denies the notion of truth and undermines student morals, but it undermines critical thinking and philosophy and the humanities. And Bloom was a prophet speaking at a time when no one believed him. But then we wonder, why has this happened? It was the universities that had an influence. How about socialism and Marxism? Why is it gaining so much traction in the younger generation? Where are they getting from that? Where are they getting the idea that the free markets are bad? It's coming from the ideas being taught by their university teachers, that socialism is good. Here's another example, critical theory. We've heard a lot about this in the news. It's a Marxist-inspired movement in social and political philosophy applied to culture that divides everybody into two categories. You're either the oppressed or you're the oppressor. It's a Marxist construct. And the goal of critical theory is to overcome those structures through which we are oppressed. Well, you say, what are those structures? Now, to Karl Marx, those structures were the economy, the economic structures, and religion. To the neo-Marxists, the critical theorists, it's capitalism, it's heteronormativity, it's traditional family, and it's Christianity. Those ideas were taught first in the university, and we wonder why they're spreading all over. Another great example that you might not have heard of is the idea of repressive tolerance. Ooh, that's an interesting phrase, isn't it? Repressive tolerance. Do you ever wonder what happened to tolerance? The old tolerance? I do, where you listen to somebody respectfully, even if you happen to disagree with them. Well, it was Herbert Marcuse in 1965 and his ideas spreading through the university. He was a neo-Marxist, and he said, free speech must not be tolerated. Only tolerate what you agree with, and everything else should be canceled. Where did cancel culture come from? It started in the universities. things that are played out in the street right now, and we see they're having a destructive influence on American life. And friends, when it comes to future political leadership in America, consider the fact that the vast majority of universities in America training future political leaders are training them with progressive, and I hate that word, regressive is probably a better way to put it, political beliefs to lead our government in the future. What are they being taught? They're being taught that freedom is absolute. It should be free from all authority. Absolute autonomy is being taught. Virtue does not exist. Truth doesn't count. The law has no final point of reference. God is irrelevant. Humans don't have dignity. We're not even sure if humans are special anymore. Socialism is the future. The flag and patriotism are offensive. Certain words should be banned from the classroom, like illegal alien, male and female. I'm telling you, this spells disaster for our future unless something dramatic happens on the college level. Because the left has a stranglehold on American colleges and universities. And conservatives must mount up counter strategies. We can either try to change existing schools, which will be very difficult, though some are given to that, and we're glad for organizations like ISI and others. But we need to also invest in new alternative schools that are teaching what we think should be taught. But for a moment, would you just think with me, what if? What if there was a university where it was devoted to the pursuit and love of truth? It wanted its students to believe in truth and not be post-truth and not be triggered by claims of truth. What if there was a university, instead of obsessing about safe spaces, microaggressions, and creating a snowflake culture, challenged students to become resilient and wouldn't shut down during the pandemic? By the way, CCU, we went back to class in the fall of 2020. We stayed open. We stayed open because our students did not want to put their future on hold. And now we look back and we're so glad that we did. What if there was a university devoted to teaching students how to learn and think for themselves, how to speak confidently and write clearly and effective and become great readers? And they became lifelong learners because of the skills they learned at their school. What if there was a university that encouraged debate and taught students to listen respectfully and civilly to one another, presenting reasoned arguments and listening to other points of view? By the way, we have had debates on campus this past semester. Debate is dying in university culture. Why is it dying? Because people don't believe in debate anymore. They believe in power. Our debate team's doing well all over the country. At Yale Law School this past spring, you probably heard the story of how a bipartisan free speech panel was shut down. The students wouldn't allow it at Yale Law School. Whereas at Colorado Christian University, we had debates about all kinds of things, including reparations. In fact, at CCU, we opened the debate up, and with ISI, we had one speaker representing pro-reparations, who was a white Catholic progressive. And then we had a faculty member from DePaul University, African-American, gay African-American, arguing against reparations. Now, you would think it would be a volatile evening, but students sat and listened respectfully about a very important issue in American life. It happened at CCU, not at Yale. What's going on? What's going on? What if? What if there was a university that gave students significant opportunities to serve during their 4 years and required community service, 180 hours of it? What if there was a university that prepared them for significant positions of leadership in government and business and profession, but they were conservative students? What if there was a university that believed in transmitting wisdom and knowledge and the best of the past so that students could navigate their future? What if there was a university that helped students develop habits of character and moral formation? What if there was a university that required a robust core curriculum instead of curricular chaos, which required a basic knowledge of core subjects to be a good citizen? What if there was a university where students graduated not ignorant of history, but they have an understanding of their culture and their nation and the Constitution. What if there was a university that still believed in the humanities, that instead of transforming the humanities into a study of victim groups and oppressors, they were exposed to the best of the past and it lifted them to become better people? What if there was a university that still believed in the liberal arts, that season of life where you can explore other subjects and expose yourself to goodness, beauty, and truth? What if there was a university that taught them to impact culture in support of traditional family values, the sanctity of life, compassion for the poor, a biblical view of human nature, limited government, free markets, natural law, original intent of the Constitution, and Western civilization? What if there was a university where it wasn't a spiritual wasteland like so many universities, but they wanted to deepen your faith and help you make it your own so that you come to honor Christ and His kingdom, and you'd come to love the Bible, and you'd have a sense of a Christian worldview so you could integrate faith and knowledge? What if there was a university that instead of deconstructing your kids, built them up and built on the foundation that parents laid for them through the years? And what if there was a university that instead of teaching students to deplore their past, despise their present, and despair of their future, instead taught them to appreciate their past, throw off a victim mentality, and rise up with courage in the present and have hope for their future? What if there was a university like that? I'm sorry, I've moved from speechifying to preaching. And what if there was a university that instead of preparing students for jobs, prepared them for callings, where they had a sense of divine mission, serving God and man in whatever they do? And what if at that university they were surrounded with like-minded students who would provide community and a friendship for life that would support them? Well, I've got news for you. There are a handful of universities like that left in our country, and CCU, Colorado Christian University, is one of them. We are putting the higher back in higher education. You know, here's what some of the others, leaders and conservative leaders are saying about CCU. We were with former Vice President Mike Pence this spring. He said, CCU is the lantern of the Rockies, keeping the flame of faith and liberty alive to turn this country around. Mike Huckabee said, CCU is building the kind of leaders we desperately need in this country, schools that have an unapologetically biblical foundation, and it's the only hope we have for our nation. Former U.S. Senator Hank Brown of Colorado, who was the former president of the University of Colorado, he said, CCU is one of the few places in Colorado where you can teach values openly. You are the guiding light for values-based education in Colorado. Ken Starr, who is former president of Baylor, came to CCU and said, CCU is, and these are his words, I wouldn't put it like this, but he said, you're one of the few legitimate universities in the United States. Well, I'm encouraged when other people outside notice the good things that are happening at Colorado Christian University. It's exciting to see others pick up the spirit and say, we need that, we need more of that. And of course, these are exciting days for the university. We just graduated our largest class ever. We just finished our 12th consecutive year of record enrollment, and we are heading towards our 13th consecutive year of record enrollment. We were once again acknowledged by the American Council of Trustees and Alumni for the 7th year for our award-winning robust core curriculum. We are poised to break ground for the Bill Armstrong Center that we can't wait to have put up. We're putting before students an educational model of competence, character, Christ-centered faith, and Constitution, a belief in our Constitution. And by the way, we are the most pro-life university in the United States. So, friends, later today, you're going to be hearing about a new public policy initiative at CCU where we're going to be inviting you to help us. And what we need is, we need a future generation of Bill Buckleys and Thomas Sowells and Betsy DeVosses. We want to create America's finest conservative statesmanship school for future leadership in our government. We already have the pieces in place. We have conservative strategic priorities that guide us as a university. We have a think tank called the Centennial Institute, for which we're very grateful. We have the Western Conservative Summit, and we're grateful for those things. But as we look at our mission and our university, the next step for us is to make inroads in this area of public policy and scholarships for students who can study here and become our future leaders. And I want to ask you, will you help us and pray about helping us to take that next step? Because our future hinges on growing schools like CCU and producing students who are right-minded students who are pursuing an ordered liberty. Conservatives care about many different issues, and they're all important, but never forget, education remains a basic conservative task because it determines our future. It engages in the long-term battle for the hearts and minds of the next generation. And so keep in mind as you listen today that the future will be determined not simply by who wins Congress or the next election, but by what happens in our colleges and universities. The future will be determined by who wins the hearts and minds of young Americans. Will you help us maximize our impact and become a great university for such a time as this? Thank you very much.
Please welcome commentary editor and columnist for the Washington Times and Newsmax contributor, Kelly Sadler.
Good morning. So do you know what today is? Today is the 495th day of total Democratic control of Washington, D.C. So where are we now? Well, today we hit a new record high of gasoline prices, that is. The national average is now at $4.82. We're 18 cents shy of $5, but given Joe Biden's policies, I'm sure we'll be there by July 4th weekend. We're also suffering a baby food shortage. Can you believe that? Millions of mothers across this country cannot find the formula to feed their baby infants. This is Joe Biden's America. I want to reflect on some happier times. January 2020. In January 2020, I was working on behalf of President Donald Trump. I was in his political action committee, working on the re-elect, working on the campaign, and things were going really, really well for the country. Gas prices, the average gasoline price for a gallon, was $2.58. We had achieved, for the first time in our history, becoming a natural gas and oil net exporter. We had renegotiated NAFTA, which was a presidential promise in 2016, and renegotiated it on behalf of American workers, on behalf of American interests, and on behalf of American companies. We signed the USMCA into law with Canada and Mexico. Donald Trump also hosted a Chinese delegation in January of 2020, signing a historic agreement with them for them to stop infringing and stealing our IP, as well as agree to buy a lot of goods like soybeans from our U.S. farmers. Things were going well. We had 2 confirmed Supreme Court justices that were serving on the Supreme Court who were pro-life, pro-Second Amendment, and pro-constitutionalists. We had a record to run on. Even President Trump, yeah, you might not like his tweets, but he was sitting at the Gallup polls at 49%, which is better than where Joe Biden is today, and we were feeling very good. We were feeling very good, that is, until China unleashed a worldwide pandemic. They concealed the origins of the pandemic. They concealed the transmission rates of the pandemic. We did not know anything about what we were dealing with. Donald Trump did spring into action. He immediately shut down travel to and from China with a Chinese travel ban. He also unleashed the Defense Production Act so that hospitals would have the needed PPE to take care of the sick patients. He started working immediately on Operation Warp Speed, which gave us the vaccinations we needed to protect the most vulnerable. However, at the same time, Democrats also sprang into action. They sprang into action, never let a good crisis go to waste. They worked to consolidate their power and their control and to erode our civil liberties. One of the first things Democratic operatives did in 2020 was to make sure that they could shore up the vote in November. So they expanded access to mail-in votes, mail-in ballots, absentee ballots. They unleashed a bunch of drop boxes in cities in Atlanta, for example, that had never been done before. They also, blue state governors also shut down our places of worship, reducing congregations down to mere Zoom calls. They started shutting down small businesses. Small Main Street businesses were shut down as Amazon flourished, as Google flourished. Some of us were deemed essential workers during that period, others were not. The essential workers during that time made sure that those non-essential workers who had the luxury of staying home had the goods, the food, and the services they needed to become locked down. We had the mandates then. The mandates started with the mask mandates, and then they went into the vaccine mandates. And if you didn't have a vaccine, then you didn't have a job. This was incredible. Just sitting back and watching it. The worst thing, I believe, that happened during this pandemic and the pandemic lockdowns, however, was the closing of our children's schools without an endpoint of when they would be reopened. I'm a mother of 3 boys. Marcus, Lucas, and John. They were in 1st and 2nd grade when the schools first got shut down in March of 2020. These are valuable years for kids who are just learning to read, to add, and subtract. I knew, or had the instinctive feeling, that these schools were not going to reopen in the fall. I live in Fairfax County, Virginia, which is supposed to have the best school system in America. Really, one of the best, right? After we were closed down, it took them a month to get their online school going up. And then once it was up, all of us parents realized this is a joke. They're just telling kids to mute their speakers. They're not actually reading or writing or learning anything here. I need to get my kids back into in-person learning, and I need to get it done as soon as possible. So what were my options? I'm trying to work, I'm on a re-election campaign, but I'm also trying to protect my children from the chaos that was happening in our country. Our children are our most valuable resource, and we need to sacrifice ourselves for them. We were doing the exact opposite at this point in time. I found a great Baptist private school that promised to reopen in the fall. I had the luxury of putting my boys in that school because I could afford it. There are millions of families across America who did not have that same luxury, that students could not go back to public schools in the fall. During the summer of 2020, when JR, my youngest, John, tested to get into this private school, he couldn't advance to 2nd grade. He had to be held back. He did not learn enough in his public school in 1st grade to advance to 2nd grade. This is fine, but this is only 3 months at this point of view that he lost these learning skills. Kids' schools were closed for close to more than a year. Democrats say they want to lower the economic equality, income equality gap. They want to squeeze the education inequality gap. This only heightened it. It only expanded it. And no one was talking about it. Us conservatives were. We were on the front lines in the summer of 2020 saying that we needed to get our schools reopened. Ron DeSantis committed to getting his schools reopened in Florida, and he was vilified by the mainstream media. Mainstream media didn't talk about it. CNN had their death tracker, right? Every single day, how many deaths has this country accumulated under Donald Trump's watch? They got rid of that death tracker. I wonder why. Joe Biden has accumulated more deaths, but no one wants to talk about that, right? It was used as a political weapon against the right with no regard to our children. So where do we go from here? Well, first we need to remember what the Democrats and the teachers' unions did to us. They were given COVID money in the summer of 2020 to put ventilators in the schools, to sanitize the schools, to come up with COVID protocols. We now know that little to none of that money was spent on improving those resources. They opened up for a couple weeks and they shut back down because of the Delta variant, and they remained closed as the teachers' unions imposed more and more restrictions on when they would reopen. Let's remember in the spring of 2021, when the vaccinations had become available, teachers were put on the front lines to get, first in line to get one of those vaccinations, hoping that if they got that vaccination, they'd get back in the classroom. That didn't happen. Their list of demands grew. They wanted CRT, to be included in their school curriculum. They wanted LGBTQ rights to be verified in their curriculum. They wanted the children to get vaccinated before they felt safe to go back into the classroom. They had these listed demands, depending on where you were in this country, that had absolutely nothing to do with COVID-19, right? And then you have Randi Weingarten, who teamed up with Biden's CDC to further the goalposts on when schools and when teachers would feel safe going into the classroom. We can never forget this, and we can never forgive this. So what do we as conservatives do? Well, the first thing we need to advocate for with all of our hearts and our collective spirit is school choice. Parents know what's best for their children. Parents and parents alone. The government, the public education system has failed us. The only way for us to know that our children are getting the education that they deserve and they need is to have the freedom to choose which school they attend. Luckily, a lot of red states are implementing, a better choice with charter schools. Basically following the money, giving parents the money. So if they decide to put their child in private school, like I did, they get compensated. Or they can, if they want to homeschool, for example, which is a wonderful thing, they get compensated for their time and effort in doing so. We as conservatives, the Democrats and the teachers' unions are going to fight this with every ounce of their body. But we need to remember what they did to us, what they did to our youth. We're just seeing the ramifications of it now. And right now, the mainstream media is actually starting to cover what these school lockdowns did. New York Times had a very interesting article last week, and I don't quote for them often, but here. They surveyed a bunch of school counselors from across the country to check in on how the students were doing now that they've been back in school. 94% of these counselors said that their students are showing more signs of anxiety and depression than before the pandemic. 88% of their students are having a hard time regulating their emotions. 86% are falling behind on classwork. 85% are chronically absent. When the schools reopened, they didn't reopen with the schools. They just decided to drop out permanently. Here's a quote from one of the counselors that was interviewed. She's from Wisconsin, talking about her student body. The students have less stamina, more frustration, less flexibility, less effort, less perseverance, more escape, and avoidance behaviors. This is our nation's youth that were subjected to these school lockdowns. Not only has it impacted them academically, it's impacted them emotionally as well. So what do we need to do? The first steps are, remember this, and vote Democrats out come November. We need to take hold of Congress so they can't pass any more of their draconian laws, lockdowns, institute CRT, whatever. At least we can stop them. And then 2024, we need to have a Republican as president. And we need to go full-throated with school choice and make that a priority for our nation's kids. Thank you so much. I appreciate your time. And get out and vote this November.
Please welcome Grassroots Director at Heritage Action for America, Janae Strachey.
Good morning, Western Conservative Summit. How are you all? Good? Some of you need some coffee still. Well, I have the honor and privilege of being the director of Grassroots at Heritage Action for America, which really just means that I get to be the bridge between DC and real America. Can I get an amen for real America? But yes, I do sacrifice my time and live in the DC area, but thankfully get to travel a lot and join all of you out in the States. So listen, you guys, you all know the mantra very well, never let a crisis go to waste, right? The left employs this tactic often. They used COVID-19 to gain control and incite fear through mask mandates and other arbitrary restrictions. They used the chaos in our streets and Black Lives Matter to justify and normalize critical race theory. They're using a mental health crisis in our country right now to further deconstruct the traditional family unit and the fact that there are two sexes, male and female. I know that all of you could stand up and chime in and add more examples of the left doing this, that they will capitalize on something and spin it. But I want to offer you some encouragement. The left has overplayed their hand. Yep, there was a lot of damage from COVID-19, and we're still dealing with those effects. But it did shed a new light on what's actually happening in our classrooms. It got parents engaged in a new way. They were hearing it on their Zoom. Black Lives Matter, yes, has caused a lot of destruction as well to businesses, homes, families, but they also have exposed their own racism. And families everywhere are rejecting it. We're passing laws to get it out of our schools. To be quite frank, we are still in the middle of the transgender fight and this gender ideology that the left is pushing, but we know that suicide rates are going up. We're watching the suicide rates go up as kids are transitioning. Our inflation continues to skyrocket, as Kelly just shared with you guys. The gas prices, families everywhere are struggling to pay for gas, groceries. Our borders are being flooded by drug traffickers and terrorists, and yet we're sending billions to Ukraine to secure their borders instead of our own. There are so many more examples of this. The bottom line is that our country is in crisis. The left has created a window of opportunity for us, and we should not let it go to waste. Now, albeit it's a small window, it is a small window. The time to act is now. So we at Heritage Action to Win are activating people just like you all across this country. We have 2 million activists and 20,000 sentinels across the country. Do I have any sentinels in the room? Where are you at? There you go. There's a few of you. I have a team of regional coordinators across the country that are working hand in hand with people all across the country to be the advocators of good policy, to be the decision makers. We do trainings on how to run for school board or other elected positions, and to be the enforcers. So if we get good policies on the books, then what? Who's enforcing them? Who are the election day poll workers? We do trainings to help you know how to do that. We also host a weekly strategy call, and if you join Sentinel, you'll have access to that exclusive call where we update you with information and fights happening both on the federal and state level that week. We seek to give you resources to arm you to make your activism more impactful. So we would love to have you join us. I want to leave you with this encouragement. The left is always going to be lighting their hair on fire because the government is their God. They don't have anything else to live for. But we do. If you're a Christian like me, then we are fighting with hope and joy because this is not our forever home. But we are fighting with passion and veracity because God has called us to be good stewards of this earth and this beautiful land that we get to call home, this beautiful land of the free. We are called to protect the freedoms that we are given, and you can take it to the bank that we at Heritage Action are and will do everything we can, this window of opportunity, to go on offense and win back our country. It's not going to be another government program, institution, or even a particular law that's passed that's going to save our American. Lord willing, it will be you, the American people. It will be an uprising of God-fearing, hardworking people that chose courage and boldness and stood up and acted. So if you want to join us and learn more about what we're doing and how we can empower you to further your activism and holding our elected officials accountable, join us in our breakout in Summit 2 and 3 at 11 a.m. Thank you, everyone, for all that you're doing. We cannot do this without you, so thank you.
Please welcome back Jeff Hunt.
All right.
So during the 2022 Colorado legislative session, abortion has passed one of the nation's most radical abortion laws, specifically denying any preborn child any rights in the state of Colorado. The Centennial Institute did everything we could to try to stop it. We sent thousands of emails to legislators. Our think tank, in partnership with CCU for Life, stayed at the Capitol to nearly 4 a.m. testifying against this bill. We helped organize a rally outside the steps of the Capitol to support the legislators that were fighting for the most vulnerable in our state. Two of those legislators, Representative Stephanie Luck and Senator Bob Gardner, are with us today. Representative Stephanie Luck helped lead a historic filibuster lasting over 24 hours in the Colorado House of Representatives in an effort to stop this radical abortion bill. Absolutely. Senator Gardner helped lead a similar effort in the Senate. Please join me in welcoming these two champions for the sanctity of life, Representative Stephanie Luck and Senator Bob Gardner.
Please welcome Colorado State Senator for District 12, Bob Gardner, and Colorado State Representative for District 47, Stephanie Luck.
Well, we're glad to have you here. It should automatically turn on, so you should be good to go there, Representative Luck. So a lot of people know what happened. We saw a lot of the news reports. The left introduced this bill. It was one of the more radical bills in the country to just fully allow abortion with almost no restrictions whatsoever in the state of Colorado. You all were on the front lines of this. You were fighting against it. So give us insight from behind the scenes. I mean, this was a really historic effort led by your side, the pro-life side, down at the state capitol. So why take this on? Why make such an effort to fight it? And what was going on during those moments? I'll start with you, Stephanie Luck.
Thank you, Jeff, and thank you for having us talk about this really important issue. So, in terms of what happened, we are supposed to file our bills in January and February. And the majority knew that they were going to file this bill, and it's my understanding that they had it drafted well before 2022 even was rung in, the new year. And yet they waited until almost halfway through session to introduce it. It was introduced on a Thursday, March 3rd, and when I found out about it, I realized why my bill that was scheduled for health and insurance the next Wednesday was being pushed back a week. Because they were clearing the calendar in order to speed the process so that this bill would go through as quickly as possible and as smoothly as possible so that the opposition couldn't be rallied. Now, I, along with a number of other people, started to text and call leaders in the Colorado pro-life movement and say, we need to get on this. We need to make sure that we rally the troops and that there are many people there to testify on Wednesday and to voice their opposition. Because the pro-life community here in Colorado is so connected and so committed, we saw in the first committee hearing, which was the following Wednesday, so less than a week after the bill was introduced, we had a committee hearing, and we saw a 6-to-1 opposition ratio. So for every one person who showed up to testify in favor of the bill, 6 people showed up to testify in opposition. And that committee hearing, yes, please. And that is a round of applause for many of you in the audience, and I thank you for that, because the messages that were brought out in committee were then reiterated on the House floor. And it is essential, it's absolutely essential that you come. Even if you feel like it's hopeless because they continue to vote against what you're saying, it is essential that we make a stand and that they know that we're watching and that we're willing to reorganize our schedules, that we're willing to stay up until 2 or 3 in the morning to protect life. And that really is what boiled down to why we fought so hard. If we as a society cannot protect the most vulnerable among us, vulnerable meaning those in the womb who have no voice other than ours, as well as vulnerable for those women, because I don't know if you realize this, but over 60% of women polled say that it wasn't actually their choice. They felt pressure from some section of their life, whether it was their significant other, their employer, their teacher, their parents, to have an abortion. And so we have vulnerabilities all over, and our communities deserve better than that. This is a life or death issue. And if we can't give our all, literally give our all, then what are we up there for? And so we absolutely said we're going to fight this. And I just will mention it's been categorized as a filibuster. And I just want to challenge that framing a little bit. A filibuster is often understood to be a waste of time. We just talk and talk and talk in order to waste time. That was not our intention. Our intention was to change hearts and minds. We wanted to put forth arguments, solid arguments, to cut down every aspect of what they were saying is true, and to say, no, actually, this is true, this is true, this is true. And what we found in doing that, Jeff, was a good response from our colleagues on the left. We had people come to us at 2 or 3 or 4 in the morning, and because of exhaustion, those walls, those defensive mechanisms that we tend to have as elected officials started to crumble just purely because of sleep deprivation. And folks started to say, you know what, I've never heard the pro-life argument. I've never understood why you stand against abortion. Now I'm starting to understand. And there were movements. People were beginning to say, yeah, maybe life is inherently valuable. Maybe it doesn't matter. I had a colleague say to me that, well, I'm just going to use their so that I don't give away what gender, but that their understanding up until that point was that you only have significance if you do something significant. And our debate caused this person to begin to realize that's not true, that you have significance purely because you are. And if our culture would begin to understand that and really internalize that, we would not have the issues we have with suicide and with breakdown and with identity questions. We wouldn't have those issues. And so it wasn't so much about wasting time. It was about putting forth a persuasive case to say, everybody deserves a birthday. Women deserve better. Our communities deserve better. Men deserve better. The next generation deserves better. And this bill is extreme and outrageous and should not be implemented into our law.
Senator Gardner, I'll turn it over to you.
Thank you. As Representative Luck said, this was an important issue. Now, place it against the backdrop of where we were back in February and March with the Dobbs case going before the United States Supreme Court. This is before leaked draft opinions, which has made it even more stark as to what this debate is about and how important it is. The House spent a historic amount of time on the debate. The Senate is about half as many people, and because of that, the debate is often not as long, but very civil. We realized after the House introduction and committee hearing and debate there that this bill was not going to be changed. It's pretty rare for a bill with any controversy to go through the Colorado General Assembly without any substantive change at all, but this bill did. And the pro-choice movement had planned this. They were willing to sink a week of legislative time in a very limited session, a week in the House, a week in the Senate, to get their policy done. And so it became important for all of us to make clear what the case is for life. This may not be the most popular thing to say, but I think it's important. We heard a lot of testimony that talked to the other side in scriptural terms, and that resonates with me, and I know it resonates with you. But the most compelling arguments are about the actual value of life from a societal perspective, and causing those of the liberal view to have to answer the question, is the value of life dependent upon whether someone wants that life or not? Because that, in fact, is how the debate began to shape up in the Senate. We had a physician who was with Democrats for Life who talked about all of the heroic things that we can do today. You can remove a child from the womb at 20 weeks, perform open heart surgery, replace the child in the mother's womb, and that child has a wonderful life in front of them. That is heroic, and that is what we do when parents want that done. And then, in contrast to that, the testimony was Well, I was at so many weeks. I was at 30 weeks, and it was just inconvenient for me. That paradox, that conflict is what has caused people to have to answer the question, what do you really mean about this? Is life only valued if you want it? Because for those on the other side of the aisle, that's a really hard question, because that really doesn't mirror the rest of their view about everything else. So it was important that those who hold that view were there, that testified for life and made the case for life, and we need to continue to do so. We need to do so as each and every state legislature deals with this decision.
Yeah, so as Roe v. Wade goes down, hopefully, we've seen the draft document. We think that'll happen at any moment. This is all going to become a decision of the states. So if you think this issue is not going to become a major part of Colorado politics, it's going to become one of the biggest parts of Colorado politics. Now, from what I heard, Representative Luck, all the testimony helped fuel the fire, right? It showed that there was a groundswell of pro-life commitment in this state, and that helped encourage you. Now, I'll give you a little insight. We were part of a coalition that said, you know, let's go plan a rally. And we happened to plan the rally just haphazardly at 11 a.m. on a Saturday. We had no idea what that was going to mean. It just happened to be when the time was available. That happened to coincide with the end of this historic, I know you don't like the word filibuster, but this historic debate on the House floor. And so you all walked out to hundreds of people on the steps of the Capitol cheering you on. I saw tears in a lot of the legislators' eyes. What was that moment like? You'd been fighting, you lost that battle. You didn't lose the war, but you lost that battle, and you walk outside to a whole lot of people very proud of you. What did that moment mean as a legislator?
It really meant everything. So I will give you a little bit of background. Representative Williams has a whole book of strategies of how to engage. And one of his strategies was to create teams so that if Team A was debating, the other teams could be off the floor resting. And so we implemented that strategy. Now, he and I stayed on the floor the entirety of the time, but others were able to go rest, which meant that we were able to elongate our debate way beyond what it had been, because we weren't growing tired. We weren't becoming so delusional, I guess, or delirious is a better word, with exhaustion. And so we were able to maintain that. And there was at a period of time when the other side of the aisle was coming over and just pressuring us constantly, even throwing our pro-life convictions back in our face, saying, if you were really pro-life, you would end this debate so we could all go home, because you're putting us at risk having to drive tired. And of course, you know, my thought was, well, almost all of us have a couch or a chair. In fact, I offered my couch to anyone who wanted to sleep so that they didn't have to drive home tired. But obviously, this is more important than our convenience. And so, you know, we were talking amongst a core group of us and saying, do you feel like it's time now to end this conversation? Do you feel like we've said what we needed to say? And at 2 o'clock we hadn't, at 3 and 4 and 5 and 6 and 7 o'clock we still hadn't said all the things we wanted to say, and at 8 and 9. And so about 10 o'clock, the group of us, we just felt this release. It was almost like the Spirit of the Lord had said, okay, what is done is done. This is finished. You can move on. And so we ended that feeling as if we had done the job we were called to do. Now, looking back on it, I think, oh my goodness, we missed this argument, we missed this. Like, we missed the whole postnatal conversation about this being opening a door to infanticide, possibly, right? But we felt as if at that moment we had done what we were supposed to do. And it was wonderful to be able to walk out and know that, yes, while the vote was taken and the bill was moving on to the next stage, we hadn't lost, because we walked out to a group of people cheering for us and for the fight that we had. I had been told throughout the course of the evening that I was actually going to harm the party that I represent by doing this fight. And that people were not going to support us at the election, which is, you know, horrible. And then to walk out and say, no, we actually see that there is a fire in people, and they appreciate what we did. They appreciate the arrows that we took as individuals. They appreciate all that we put into this, the nights within that week, because all we had was a week to prepare, that they appreciate it. And so I cannot thank you enough for organizing that. And this is the beauty, really, of of joint efforts, because all of us are called as Nehemiah to stand, as Nehemiah did with his people, to stand on a different section of the wall. And by standing on your section of the wall, you put courage into us to then pick up that debate again on Monday at third reading, and for all of us once again to reiterate those points. And I can't tell you, walking out there, hearing the cheers, hearing the support, and knowing that we stood for life and we had the people behind us. And so thank you.
Jeff, I just want to say, to close out, for me and many of my colleagues, I think it's even the quiet moments when we were in committee for a full 12 or 13 hours. And as you walk out and you're pretty exhausted, to have a woman walk up to you and say, as one did to me, Senator Gardner, thank you, and I wish before I had had my abortion that someone had told me the facts that you just shared. To walk off of the floor of the Senate and have a colleague who voted for the bill say, I never thought about the things that you said. I know I voted for the bill, but I never thought about the things you said about the value of life. And that's, for all of us, I think, ultimately, the moments that matter. Thank you.
And if I can just
Go ahead, yeah, real quick.
summate, light shines in the darkness, but the darkness cannot overcome it. This battle demonstrates that, so continue to shine.
Can we give these champions of life a round of applause?
Thank you.
Great. We're going to be honoring all the legislators this evening with our Faith, Family, and Freedom Awards, so thank you guys so much for being a part of this. Great.
Public education has gone off the rails.
It's about power and money and politics, and somehow the kids are getting lost in all of that.
It doesn't matter whether you're a Democrat or Republican, you're a mom and a dad first.
Critical race theory is dividing our children.
Racism is racism.
Our teachers are bullied. Parents are shut out.
Less than 1/3 of America's school children are proficient in anything.
They're teaching these kids X-rated sex acts.
Whose children are they?
Whose children are they?
Whose children are they?
Please welcome President and founder of Parents United America and producer of the documentary Whose Children Are They?, Deborah Flora.
Thank you. Thank you all so much. Whose children are they? That's one of the most resounding questions of our day. That question is the reason why I started Parents United America and why my husband Jonathan and I produced a documentary by the same name. I think all of us here know the answer to that question, don't we? Whose children are they? They're our children. They do not belong to the government-run schools. You see, we know that it is intrinsically the right of every parent to be the ultimate authority in their children's lives. But that ideal, the very cornerstone of Western civilization, is under assault right now by its antithesis. The Marxist idea that the children do belong to the state, that it is the ruling elite that has the right to teach our children everything from alternate values to worldview to their very identity. You see, I witnessed this firsthand when I was in the Soviet Union and East Germany far behind the wall. I saw parents afraid of their own children whose ultimate allegiance was not to family or faith, but to the state. That is why we have to stand together. You see, we see this encroachment happening in critical race theory. What is that? Simply Marx's critical theory with a different wrapper. It basically separates people into groups and pits them against each other. We see it when parents are called barriers by teachers' unions, and when the most innocent amongst us are indoctrinated and not educated. We made the documentary, Whose Children Are They?, because we wanted to galvanize parents, grandparents, good citizens to stand together and to fight for the innocence of our children. That's why I invite you all to join us in our breakout session at 11 a.m. today, because we are going to talk about real solutions to save our schools and safeguard our students. But now I want to ask you a couple more questions that echo the first. You see, the crossroads that we are at is not just in our education system. It's in every area of our society. Today, We stand at the crossroads between freedom and Marxism. Marxism is that collectivist idea that we see in the council culture that tries to bully anyone into silence who dares not go along with the groupthink. We see it in the dehumanizing push to collectively judge entire groups of people based on their occupation, if they're the police, or the amount of melanin you have in your skin. We all know that this is wrong, and we know that America, it's the direct contrast, that once in all of human history, revolutionary idea that says every single individual has intrinsic value created by God with inalienable rights. That is what America is. So here's my next question. We've answered whose children are they? Whose country is this? We know the phrase that the future belongs to those who believe in the beauty of their dreams. Here's my question. Do we believe in the beauty that is America? Because our future is going to lie in the hands of those who believe it most and are willing to fight for it most. Do we believe more in the dream of America than others believe in the nightmare of socialism? Do we believe more in individualism than others believe in collectivism? And do we believe more in freedom than others believe in force? If we do, and we must, here's the final question we have to answer today, and as we leave this meeting. What are we willing to do to fight for the beauty of its future? Last Monday was Memorial Day, the day that we honor those who so believe in the beauty of America and freedom that they were willing to pay the last full measure of devotion. They stood on the battlefield. Are we willing to stand today and honor them by standing in our schools, our neighborhoods, in our communities? Because we have to. It is up to us now. We are in the midst of an awakening. But here's my word today, and my question for myself as well. We cannot take it for granted. We cannot go back to sleep, and we cannot slip into some false illusion of security. You see, Benjamin Franklin talked about what we have been given as a heritage, and he said it is a republic if we can keep it. We are the generation that is going to decide that once and for all. We were born for such a time as this. Every single person in this room has unique gifts that are needed more than ever in this day as we stand together. And I believe that if we do answer those questions with one voice resoundingly, we will win. So I ask you, whose children are they? They're our children. Whose country is this? It's our country. Let's stand together as we go forth from this place, and I promise you, if we do, future generations, especially our children who are most at risk, will look back and gratefully say, we were the ones that pushed back from the precipice and saved this, the last best hope of man on earth. Let's stand together. God bless you. God bless America, the best idea of governance in the history of mankind. Thank you so much.
Please welcome Dean and Associate Professor of International Business and Marketing at Colorado Christian University, Dr. Peter Kerr.
Last night, for the first time in a long time, I felt hope. Are you feeling the hope? There is hope. Now, as a former Air Force officer, well, I can tell you, there are dark clouds rolling across this land. But above those clouds is a bright sun. And as a Christian, I can tell you that above the sun on earth is the sun of love in heaven. And from him comes hope. I hope that you will take the hope from this place and spread it everywhere. Because what we really need is a contagious hope to reinvigorate America. Now, I would love to tell you about how to have hope. I'd love to tell you all kinds of good news. I love being the bearer of good news. I've been asked to give you a snapshot of the U.S. economy. It's not happening, yeah. When I was 14, I read The Decline and Fall of the Roman Empire. And I just remember thinking over and over, the decline was so obvious. Where were the good Romans? Where were the good men and women who were willing to stand up and fight against it? And then here I am in America today, and the decline is so obvious. And my question becomes, where are the good women and women who can see the decline and take a stand against it? I can tell you, the good news is I have found those people. They're in this room. They're watching online. We are those people who are going to take a stand against this nonsense in our country today. Now, I want to make sure you understand that just as the Americans have stood for what's right in the past, they triumphed over even greater odds than we have today. Realize America triumphed over Nazis' aggression. It triumphed over the Cold War communists' infection. It has been triumphing for 200 years, and we're just part of that legacy. Now, the Romans finally realized, as we have finally realized, that the real threat is from within. But unlike the Romans, we also know that we have the real savior within. I intend today to give you a snapshot of the U.S. economy. I'm going to talk about the dollar as a reserve currency, about inflation. I'll conclude with some ideas to kind of figure out how to fix the macro picture, and hopefully how you can safeguard some of your personal wealth. I realize, though, that a lot of people think that economics are a little bit boring, so I'll try to add some Western color. Basically, economic figures sometimes are so dry that the bushes follow the dogs around. All right. So, where are we today? Most people don't even talk about deficits and debt anymore. I mean, our debt is over $30 trillion. That number is completely unfathomable to the human mind. So, how about we just look at the interest we paid last year on our $30 trillion debt? How much did we pay in interest? You know, you pay credit card interest. Last year, we paid $413 billion as interest on our loan. Now, to put that into perspective, that's more than the entire GDP of Israel, or of Norway, or of more than 100 other countries around the world. Their entire GDP is lower than the interest we're paying on our debt. The U.S. stock market has just endured its longest losing streak in over a decade, and there's other signs of its not remaining strong well into the future. The bond market has almost been forgotten, but let me just make sure you guys understand that it's ringing an alarm bell like never before. You see, well, actually it has rang it before, but it's been accurate every single time. When we have what's called an inversion of the U.S. Treasury notes yield curves, what that means is that people are very pessimistic. The 10-year, I know I'm getting too technical, so I'll try to explain it in simple words. The 10-year bond price, how much you expect yielded from that 10-year bond, actually is lower than the 2-year bond yield price, which is to say people are more comfortable investing in 10 years than they are in the next 2 years. And when that inversion happens, it's been the most steady indicator of recession for the past 60 years. That inversion happened in April. Typically what will happen is the stock market will go up another 10 to 12% after that, and then you'll end up with a recession. Morgan Stanley says we have a recession in the next 12 months. The German Deutsche Bank says that we'll have a U.S. recession in the year 2023. One poll of U.S. CEOs shows that the CEOs in America, more than half of them agree that a recession is imminent. Now, people keep touting the idea that unemployment is low, because it's at 3.6%. It's super low, that's true, but it's not necessarily a good thing. On May 30th, just a few days ago, a federal board governor, Chris Waller, admitted that for every 2 vacancies of jobs in America, there's only 1 person looking for a job. The problem is that people have left the workplace and aren't going back into the market. Now, what I really don't like is our current regime's explanation of this to the public, to the people. Because what they're saying is this impending recession is due to greedy industrialists and business people. This is disingenuous at best. To put it into the vernacular of our conference, this is complete, absolute, and utter horse hockey. A cowboy would probably say that if you believe this lie, you couldn't hit the ground with a hat given 3 throws. So, thank you. Yeah. The problem is government policy, not gritty business people. It's a result of the government overspending and overprinting. If you want a world government, what you've got to do is take down the United States' military and economic dominance. And the best way to take down the United States is to devalue its currency. None other than communist, revolutionist Vladimir Lenin said, the best way to destroy the capitalist system is to debauch the currency, unquote. Of course, I wouldn't take a Democrat's word, I mean a communist word, for anything. It's easy to get those confused. Instead, we actually have a more credible source in John Maynard Keynes, who said, quote, there is no subtler, no surer means of overturning the existing basis of society than to debauch the currency, unquote. I believe one of the worst lingering effects of COVID will be the destruction of the dollar's preeminence as the world's reserve currency, and that in effect, this administration's cure will prove worse than the disease. Let me explain. The world's reserve currency means the type of money that's used in international transactions. If, say, India wants to buy wool from Scotland, they will use US dollars to do it. 60% of all transactions in the world are using US dollars. And to put that into context, there's only about 2% that use the RMB from China. Now, the thing is, the dollar gets a lot of benefits from this because that means there's demand for the dollar. If 60% of the transactions in dollar, all the local governments, the national banks, have to have lots of dollars in their banks. And the reason why this is the case is because we have had historically the strongest economy. It's the most stable, and that's not a pun. I know I like puns, but it's the most stable currency out there. It's backed by the strongest economy, and really it's backed by these things: the rule of law, transparency, and checks and balances. And that's why we are the world's reserve currency. And all those things have been coming into question in the last 2 years. Some people have speculated why there's inflation, so I'll give you my 10 cents worth. Well, it's inflation. I'm going to give you a quarter's worth. The U.S. government has got too many debts. It had too many debts, so it printed money. Now, I want you to think about this. In 2000, the Fed said that we had 1 trillion total U.S. dollars circulating around the world. 1 trillion, year 2000. By the year 2020, we had $4 trillion circling around the world. In 20 years, we had a 4-fold increase of the money supply. Now, get this. Under the current regime, we went from $4 trillion to $20 trillion circulating the earth, a 5-fold increase in under 2 years. You can't do that without inflation because the dollar and its value has plummeted. Inflation right now, they're saying, is hovering around 8%. There's lots of other figures, but just realize that it could be far worse. Before World War II, Germany's Weimar Republic printed so much money that the price of bread rose from 160 marks to 200 billion marks in just 1 year. Can you imagine that happening? I can't imagine that happening in America either. But the point is, a strong economy leads to peace, and a weak economy leads to war, or even accepting of war. I don't think that Putin would have gone into Ukraine had we not had a weak economy. President Jefferson even says, quote, "It is incumbent on every generation to pay its own debt as it goes, a principle which, if acted on, would save 1/2 of the wars of the world," unquote. So here's the real danger, though. While we've been printing a lot of money and therefore causing inflation and causing our dollar to tumble in its actual value, the world's national banks are looking at us and realizing if they hold dollars, they're losing money. Every year they're losing 10% or so of their wealth. So what are they going to do? Here's the real danger. They're going to start selling their dollars, creating another tsunami of dollars into the system. And that is now happening. European banks and even the Bank of Israel this year have decided to reduce their holdings of dollars and instead have other currencies in their reserve holdings. Other factors are also attacking the dollar. That would include things like digital RMB, the central bank digital currencies in general, cryptocurrencies, the rise of SDR. If you're interested in any of those kind of cool things, at 11 o'clock we'll have a workshop on that. As far as the U.S. economy is concerned, the Fed is basically trying to do a balancing act, and I don't have trust that they will succeed. They want to make a soft landing. They want to raise interest rates just enough to stop inflation, but not hurt employment and create a recession. But they have to do this while the supply chain is severely damaged. Workforce shortages are all over the place. There's congestion points. There's lack. I mean, in this hotel alone, last night there were probably 60% of the tables open on one of the restaurants, and they couldn't seat anybody for another 2 hours because they don't have people who are willing to work. We have lack of transportation. We have rising oil prices, and we have an unjust war of aggression in Ukraine. All right, the bottom line is we do have low unemployment, but we're still probably heading for a recession. Even more dangerous, if we keep printing money, we risk destroying the dollar as the world's reserve currency. And that would be catastrophic for the economy. On our present course, we may still be maybe less than a decade away, but at some point on our present course, there'll be a total meltdown of the U.S. economic system. And in turn, that will pull the world down. And it will require an adjustment just as severe as Bretton Woods in 1944. If it happens, what will be the replacement of the dollar will be a worldwide global digital currency controlled by some world organization, and you will have traded all of your liberty for the false promises of security and prosperity. You have to understand this. This is not just about America. It's about freedom for the entire world. Just like Israel, I believe that God has blessed this world through the United States of America. We are a blessing to the nations. Despite what the liberal media report and tell you, I served in the military. I've been to 54 countries on 6 continents. I've studied 10 languages, and I can tell you this for a fact. The United States flag stands for freedom, not just from sea to shining sea, but on every shore of the earth. And freedom rings not just in Philadelphia. It echoes in places like China and Russia, where there are people who want to know, is your system good enough? Is your system better? Will you beat the tyranny that is in their countries? Fellow patriots of Colorado and citizens of America, we are bankrupting our country. We're destroying the future of our children. We're weakening the spread of freedom and democracy abroad, and we're turning into just another socialist state. The world does not need another socialist state. The world needs a strong United States of America. So how do we get our country off this path? We need conservative leaders who will stop printing money and start buying it back. We need to balance budgets, and I say if our governing politicians cannot balance a budget, they should have their pay docked, because that's their job. We need a government that's not just of the people and by the people, but that actually works for the people. In Western terms, we need to cinch up our belts, folks. We need to hit the trail, and we can't be afraid of just a few saddle sores. This won't make me popular, but I'm not a politician. And if I were, I wouldn't be a popularitician. I wouldn't be somebody who follows the masses instead of leading them. What we need are statesmen who will do the right thing regardless of what's popular, regardless of what's pragmatic, and regardless of what's in their own personal interests. We must focus America on real economic issues, rather than excessive equity politics or egregious government regulations. Pretty much every economic idea of the left is seriously flawed. Seriously flawed. We need businesses to diversify, mostly their supply chains, so that we can build agility into our systems. Too many businesses had no backups, nothing but a single source supplier. That's why the supply chain's broken. We need cap and trade only in the sense that we cap the government's intrusion, that we increase our oil supply and international trade, so we can empower the free market to transition to renewable energy. Let's build a system that gives people a hand up, not a hand out. I have many more ideas, but they'll have to wait because I want to get into a little bit about your personal wealth. Inflation will erode your buying power. It's going to impact your credit card rates, your auto loans, your adjustable mortgages, and small business loans. In the near term, commodity prices for things like food and metals and oil will all probably continue to rise. I even see long terms of inflation right on the horizon. The world's population is no longer incorporating all those Chinese people who didn't have jobs, but rather we're having job shortages in America, Europe, and even in China. Abortion is finally catching up with them. Let's hope that we get rid of it before it catches up with us. Resource scarcity is on the horizon, and so we need to dig deeper wells and deeper mines just to get the same amount of commodities. In the near term, what you could do is buy maybe $10,000 a year of inflation-linked savings bonds. Those things are guaranteed to rise higher than inflation, but really all you're doing is treading water there. You definitely need to start switching to commodities or stocks that involve commodities. Just realize this, in a high inflation environment, cash is trash in the sense that basically there's a tax. Inflation is a tax on uninvested money. So invest your money wisely. I don't think we're out of the woods. I think we might be just entering the woods economically. Edmund Burke is reported to have said, all that is required for evil to triumph is for good men to do nothing. Right. We must do something. A lesser known quote of his, though, is that the people never give up their liberties, but under some delusion. Today, our country is deluded, and that's why this conference is so important. There is something we can do, and we need to leave here not just decrying the diseases, but also clarifying the cure. Our goal has to be to generate new wealth, not just redistribute what we have. Ronald Reagan used to say that was simply higher taxation was only sharing of scarcity. We must pass laws that reward hard work and risk-taking, that unbridle the American spirit of energy and genius. We must become more active in government, more vocal in school boards, and more dedicated to sane financial policies. It's time to saddle up. Let's ride together and influence those around us. The bad news today is that we're seeing the decline of our nation. I believe that. The good news today is that with God's hope, we need not see it fall. Our nation has overcome greater challenges in the past. Now we're the chosen generation to be challenged. Our biggest enemy is apathy. Don't let it defeat you. Now is the time to rise. Now is the time to ride. I beg you, work with me. Let's preserve the land of the free and the home of the brave, and not let it become the land of the apathetic, and the home of the financially enslaved. Thank you.
Please welcome Colorado Christian University student Langford Jordan.
Good morning. It is my pleasure to be introducing Miss Stacy Washington. Miss Washington is the host of her own radio program on Sirius XM Patriot Channel 125, Stacy on the Right, and the author of Eternally Cancel-Proof, a guide for courageous Christians navigating the political battlefront. A decorated Air Force veteran, she is a strong supporter of the Second Amendment and a certified concealed carry supporter. Ms. Washington is also co-chairwoman of Project 21 and has written for many different news outlets, including Fox News Opinion, NRA America's First Freedom, and townhall.com. We are so glad to have her here at the Western Conservative Summit. Please join me in welcoming to the stage Stacy Washington.
Please welcome author and host of Sirius XM's Stacy on the Right, Stacy Washington.
All right, so thank you for the fabulous introduction, but actually I'm just somebody's mom speaking at Western Conservative Summit. We have 3 college-age kids, and that's my primary mission in life, is raising and taking care of them. So I want to give a huge thanks. I want to give a huge thanks to Jeff Hunt for giving me the opportunity to speak to you, because this speech is actually not about me, it's about you. I have a question for you. How many people here own a ladder? Raise your hand. You own a ladder? You ever owned a ladder? Awesome. So a ladder is a tool that is frequently misused. It's actually quite dangerous when it's used improperly. According to data compiled by the American National Standards Institute for 2018, there are 2,000 ladder-related accidents every year. Actually, there are 2,000 a day, and 130,000 ladder-related accidents every year. So that's 300 ladder-related deaths every single year. So usually, the problem is someone is attempting to use a ladder that's unsecured, or they're not using the 1-to-4 ratio. I bet you out of all the ladder owners here, you didn't know anything about that. So if we treat ladder issues, anything related to a ladder, the way we treat politics, we would basically end up with more injuries. We would discuss ladders all the time. We'd have news stories about ladders breaking into our regular programming on television. Ladders would go up in cost exponentially. We'd have activist groups trying to force Americans to choose a side on trivial matters such as ladder paint options and the types of devices that are allowed to secure ladders in place. We'd even have people questioning the validity of the 1-to-4 ratio and whether it's racially motivated. We'd have critical ladder theory. We would need permits to buy and sell ladders. There would be special taxes for the safest options determined by government bureaucrats in Washington, D.C. Some states would ban ladders. Does this sound like something that's good to you? Well, we would actually be doing the wrong thing, as we're doing with politics. This is exactly what's actually happened to our politics. Too much of our daily lives are occupied in the pursuit of politics, the discussion of politics, the consideration and deliberation of what's going on in Washington, D.C., when our founders gave us a representative republic that allows us to elect people to govern on our behalf and allows us to manage those people. So I want to talk to you today about the most important part of managing those people, and that is with you. It's the biblical worldview. When we align our politics with Scripture, we actually adopt a biblical worldview. Now, for those who don't know what it is, you can answer these questions, and if you answer them correctly, you have a biblical worldview. The questions are, do absolute moral truths exist? Does the Bible define absolute truth? Did Christ live a sinless life? Is God the all-powerful, all-knowing creator of the universe, and does he still rule it today? And please, nobody get that answer wrong. Is Satan real? Does a Christian have a responsibility to share their faith in Christ with other people? And is the Bible accurate in all of its teachings? The correct answer to all of these questions is yes. So if you got them all right, if you said yes to all of them, you have a biblical worldview. So Only 31% of Christians and Americans actually have a biblical worldview, and that's a part of our problem. We blame the things that are going on in our schools, the things that are going on in the streets of America, the homelessness, the things that are going on in DC on politicians and pretty much everyone else but ourselves. The fact is, we pay for the cable subscriptions. We pay for the politicians through our donations. We actually fund and are the part of everything that's happening in this entire country, and so the responsibility for what we see lies with us, and that's the way the founders intended it. So the Center for Biblical Engagement has surveyed over 400,000 Americans aged 8 to 80 to learn how engaging with Scripture can impact the quality of the key areas of daily living. So if you just read it once a week, really nothing happens. 3 times a week, there's a blip, but not really a modicum of change. But if you read Scripture 4 times a week, the results spike off the chart. You would actually experience feeling lonely 30% less. Anger issues, 32% less. Bitterness in marital relationships drops by 40%. I know some of y'all in this room need to hear that. And alcoholism drops 57%, and feeling spiritually stagnant drops 60%. So, according to Statista, only 23% of Americans attend church or synagogue every week, compared to 29% of Americans, the highest number since this poll has been taken, who've never ever set foot in a church. So we need to think about why the things that are happening in our country are actually happening. Just think about where we are now, where we don't go to church and we have pornography peddled to our children in our taxpayer-funded schools. We have critical race theory taught in schools. It's taught in colleges, corporations. We have men competing in women's sports. We have a made-up gender ideology that if you dare speak out against it, they want to cancel you, take your job, take your livelihood. We have the executive branch run by a 50-year-old man who has never achieved a positive political outcome in his entire career, a plagiarist, a failure of a politician who actually doesn't know what day it is. He is running this country. And the southern border is wide open. National gas prices averaged $4.60 yesterday. That's per gallon, by the way. You don't get a bucket of gas for that. Just get 1 gallon. The national gas price average is nothing when you think about the fact that we are now having baby formula airlifted into America, like we're the third world nations that we used to airlift food into. We even have a worker shortage. So where's all this coming from? Well, Romans 1:28 says, "And since they did not see fit to acknowledge God, God gave them up to a debased mind to do what ought not to be done. They were filled with all manner of unrighteousness, evil, covetousness, malice. They were full of envy, murder, strife, deceit, maliciousness. They were gossips, slanderers, haters of God, insolent, haughty, boastful, inventors of evil, disobedient to parents, foolish, faithless, heartless, ruthless. Though they know God's righteous decree that those who practice such things deserve to die, they not only do them, but give approval to those who practice them." Does that sound like a group of Americans today? Yeah, the organized left. So now let's talk about what we can do, because I don't want to be a total Debbie Downer, guys. So keeping a republic takes a moral, religious people, for a constitutional republic can be maintained by no other. That was one of our founding fathers, John Adams. And the late Supreme Court Justice Antonin Scalia said, "If I have brought any message to you today, it is this: have the courage to have your wisdom regarded as stupidity, be fools for Christ, and have the courage to suffer the contempt of the sophisticated world." So in that instance, that description of fool, do I have any takers? Are any of you willing to be considered fools representing Jesus Christ? A little bit more. I need more than that. So, why is our leadership in the GOP so weak? Why do we have people in the GOP who actually don't go to Washington, D.C. and make promises that they made, promises kept? Well, founding father Noah Webster can tell you why. He said, "When you become entitled to the exercise of the right of voting for public officers, let it be impressed upon your mind that God commands you to choose for rulers just men who will rule in the fear of God." Because guess what? Our representative form of government actually comes from Exodus 18. It's not something they made up. They took it right out of the Bible. The preservation of a Republican government depends on the faithful discharge of this duty. If the citizens neglect their duty and place unprincipled men in office, the government will soon be corrupted. Laws will not be made for the public good so much as for the selfish or local purposes. Corrupt or incompetent men will be appointed to execute the laws, and the public revenues will be squandered on unworthy men, and the rights of the citizens will be violated or disregarded. If a Republican government fails to secure public prosperity and happiness, it must be because the citizens neglect divine commands and elect bad men to make and administer the laws. Does this sound familiar to you? Webster said this in 1854. So he also said, in selecting men for office, let principle be your guide. It is alleged by men of loose principles or defective views of the subject that religion and morality are not necessary or important qualifications for political stations. But the scriptures teach a different doctrine. Rulers must be men who rule in the fear of God, able men such as fear God, men of truth, hating covetousness. He even says, it is to the neglect of this rule of conduct in our citizens that we must ascribe the multiplied frauds, breaches of trust, peculations, which is a word that has gone out of common usage that means petty larceny, stealing, and embezzlements of public property which astonish even ourselves, which tarnish the character of our country, which disgrace a Republican government. This is a perfect description of our government in 2022. Notice how often he calls our government a republic and not a democracy. That's because we do not live in a democracy, which is the rule of the majority. We live in a representative republic. Thank God, praise God. So a couple more quick things, because I was given 15 minutes, and as a radio host, it's kind of a nightmare. I wrote this speech over again because I'm like, how do I stick in the time? Guilty people actually don't hold other people to account. So does anyone here remember the Congressional Sexual Harassment Hush Money Fund scandal? Anyone remember that? So this was back in 2017. You had Representative Jackie Speier, Democrat from California, on MSNBC talking about $15 million that were doled out to the alleged victims of sexual harassment from congressional members over the previous 10 years. The fund was set up during the Clinton administration, and no one has done anything about it since 2017 when she talked about it on television. And the reason is because if you're guilty of paying your congressional aides out of the hush money fund, then you're probably not going to be the one to stand up and vote for its end. Am I right? You're not going to vote for the end of something that you're using that you need because you're a sexual harasser or a terrible boss. So the concept here is that guilty people don't hold guilty people to account. So we cannot send guilty people to Washington, D.C. and expect them to save our country, drain the swamp, or clean it up. They can't do it. And by the way, this is something that we know is a repetitive problem for us, and I liken it to the idea that we're just going to clean up Washington, D.C. one time, and then that's it. Who here only cleans their bathroom and their kitchen at their home one time, and that's it? Anybody? I'm glad no one raised their hand, because I would not want to be anywhere near you or shaking your hand at all, because that's just crazy. We clean our bathrooms every week. If someone's sick, we clean them more than once a week. We clean the kitchen every day. Washington, D.C. will have to be cleaned again and again and again. It's not a one-time job. So I want you to think of it as us using an instruction manual. What kind of high-performance car driver would I be if I never looked at the instruction manual? If the car calls for premium gas, I drive 87 in it. If the car says it needs service, if it needs an oil change, I just ignore that, because who cares about what the owner's manual says? Who cares what the car needs? I'm having fun pushing the sport button and driving past the speed limit. That's the way we treat politics and government. We have to treat ourselves like, kind of like the machine. And the owner's manual for us is the Bible, basic instruction before leaving Earth. We have to consult it. So what can we do? Well, first of all, No matter how often the leftists mock us praying, we have to pray. That's where it all starts. We have to plug ourselves into the power source and pray to God, not just to save this country, but to save our families, to save our children, and to give us the courage to walk that out. Because it doesn't get done while we're sitting at beautiful conferences. It gets done when all of you great people go back out after the conference is over and start actually executing on what we know needs to be done. The books that need to be taken off the shelves, the kids who need to be homeschooled or put into a Christian education model, the elected officials who need to be primaried and removed from office. All of these things are your duty and mine as citizens of this great country. Consent of the governed means we have to govern. So faith is an action word. And I've seen God act in my life so many times. He has answered so many of my prayers. And my prayer for today is that every one of you, wonderful, fantastic, courageous go-getters, created for a purpose, placed in this time in America for such a time as this, that every one of you will use your God-given talents to bring our country back to its biblical, Judeo-Christian foundation, not just for you, but for your grandkids, your kids, my future grandkids, and for all of us, because there's no place else for us to run. This is the greatest country on earth, and you're the greatest people. Don't ever forget that. You're not here by accident. You have something that you're called to do, and I hope that you'll join me in getting out there and getting it done. You can... God knew you would be born during this time. It's not an accident. It's not like he woke up this morning and said, oh, wow, look what's happening in America. That's kind of weird. He's in control. All we have to do is ask. So read my book, Eternally Cancel Proof. It's available for sale everywhere. Tune in to me on SiriusXM, and we can all work together to do exactly that. God bless you. Thank you.
Thank you, Stacy Washington. I want to thank all those that are tuning in online. We will be cutting the live feed now for a little private conversation here at the Western Conservative Summit. Stay here, but for legal reasons, we are cutting the live feed. I believe we're cut.